Just thrilled that we have more than 120 people online right now. It's pretty exciting to see so many friends and clients and people that we really value. I hope today is helpful to you. We met 2 weeks ago for a Q&A. Today's presentation will be a little bit different. It's a little bit more presentation than discussion. I have allowed, hopefully for about 10 minutes at the end, to have some chats. Melody, our moderator, will probably jump in and add some comments, and if there's some relevant chat items going on at the time, Melody, feel free to jump in and add content and questions as appropriate. We're going to do 3 poll questions today. I think you'll find interesting. The first half of what I'm going to talk about is on financial strength, something I've actually done in the past. The second half brings us to the current present and discusses strategies that hopefully you are using now or will consider as the result of today's discussion. I think I'd like to just start out because I love poll questions, because actually I get information out of that as well. And I think one of the other values of this, I think you'll find, hopefully, is that you'll see maybe kind of how you match up with where your peers are at this point. And I'm going to bring in some other poll data from the previous session as well. So Emily, if you wouldn't mind putting up the first poll question. And this was a previous poll question we had 2 weeks ago. As you read through there, you can see kind of, are you 1, 2, 3, or 4? And if you want to hit your buttons that best describe where you are right now in your situation. And Emily, I guess maybe that's hopefully enough time here. Very interesting. So we have 67% are either the first 2, and we have 32% in the second half. 8% saying we don't know if we're going to survive this. When we did this, Melody and I were on a Q&A 2 weeks ago. We ran the same poll question, and if you can remember those results right there, 67% to 37. These were the results of the poll that we did on April 16th. We had 150 people on that call. You can see that I think we're feeling like we're doing a little bit better right now than we were 2 weeks ago. Only 60% were in the first 2 categories, 40% in the lower half. 14% 2 weeks ago didn't know how they were going to survive this, and we are now at 8%. I find that encouraging. 2 weeks ago, I was alarmed by the 14%. We don't know how we're going to survive this. And I think that that's certainly important. So just moving on here, what was important before the COVID-19 pandemic? And I pulled out a slide deck that's included here of a seminar that I did at Madison Nonprofit Day in 2016. The premise was how financially strong is your nonprofit? And looking at that, so many of the things I talked about 4 years ago seem relevant today, and perhaps even more relevant than it was then. And just kind of move on. As I was sort of thinking about my presentation and what made up a financially strong nonprofit, I had, I guess when we're often faced with a question we don't maybe always know the answer for, well, I Googled it. And interesting, I didn't find a definition, and there wasn't anything out there. There's actually a great website by Wallace Foundation. It's in the last slides that we have under resources that has a number of tools and so forth. There really wasn't a definition at least 4 years ago. So I wrote my own. And as we move into this next slide right here, you can see that I said that a financially strong nonprofit is one that has sufficient liquidity and reserves, and we're going to talk about reserves today, how important those have certainly come, to weather any financial instability. Well, certainly that seems enormously relevant today. One that plans for growth and its future, utilizing a financial team that understands risks, we'll talk a little bit about that, and the numbers, and has the right internal controls and tools to reduce risk. And I took each one of those concepts that are listed in green. I have some thoughts about each one of those. And as we just kind of roll through these, remember this was 4 years ago, and we talked about financial storms. How would we ever have anticipated the financial storm that we have today in looking at this? A lot of what I talked about back then was certainly 2008, and a lot of us were around then. And interestingly, I was quoted in a newspaper, Wisconsin State Journal article about the state of the nonprofit community in 2008. And at that point, really sort of at the bottom of it, I predicted that 15% of our nonprofits that we knew would either go out of business, merge, or reduce or shrink into some size that would not be as recognizable as today. Fortunately, I was wrong. It actually was about 5%, I think, in 2008 to 2009-10 that found themselves not in business or not sustainable. And the perfect storm I talked about back then was really with funding, the decline of corporate contributions, the decline in government funding, which often happens. Corporate giving declines immediately. Government funding, you'll find declines over a period of time as resources are stressed. And then finally, foundation giving can decline as well, as they only pay out what, if the stock market goes down 50%, well, there's certainly a lot less that's going to be coming out of foundations. Just looking through here, who would ever have thought natural disasters would be what we would be talking about today, and to the magnitude of that. Liquidity. So again, financially strong nonprofit are ones that understand liquidity, that prepare cash flow budgets, do benchmarking and monitoring their financial ratios, and really can anticipate problems before they happen. Liquidity obviously is a concern for you and all of us today. In the corporate world, what typically happens is they reduce expenditures, accumulate, save cash. Cash is really probably the most important thing right now if you're thinking about not sustainability, but at this point, survivability. And the absence of cash obviously has severe consequences for you. And cash flow budgets are the things that help you understand what's going to happen. The role of reserves. So reserves, and I've had many discussions with you over the years. People will often ask me, well, what should our reserves be? And if you remember, those of you who've been in meetings with me, I've often said anywhere from 3 months to 6 months of your operating budget and reserve. The organizations that survived 2008 had reserves. They were able to draw on them. The ones, many of them reduced reserves substantially. I can think of some that I've worked with that found their reserves declining from as much as 6 months down to 3 months as they worked through those periods. The interesting thing about our community, our nonprofit community, is when faced with financial challenges and disasters, we're the last ones that really cut staff, cut programs, cut anything out. Corporate America will basically gut the middle part of their organizations in an attempt save money. We have, I guess, a lot of hope and faith in the future, and we also see the significant needs that are out there. So it becomes hard choices, and we're often the ones that we are a community, I should say, that doesn't do those drastic measures. Now, I'll talk about a little bit later what your intention should be about reserves in this current situation. But having adequate reserves and knowing and understanding how they're used in times like these are important. I'd love to do a whole bunch of poll questions. I just have 3 today, but how many of you have a reserve policy today, and how important that would be for you? Plans for growth. I talked about 3 strategies: do nothing, retrench, expand. Obviously, we're in an entirely different environment right now, and growth is probably not a strategy, although there are opportunities for you in this environment, obviously depending upon the service model and what your mission is. Retrench may be a strategy at this point. I've got a poll question at the end I think you'll find sort of interesting, and I'm fascinated as to what the results of that are going to be, but this certainly has to be part of financial strength, having strategy. Your financial team is so important, if not back then, now, in understanding and how you can respond. I have talked to clients, small nonprofits, that one said we just don't maybe even have the resources to put together a PPP loan application, and further discussion, we're able to scramble some resources, and some people were able to pull that together, and that organization right now is having, looks like they actually were approved, so in the first round. But this is important too. So when I talk about having cash flow budgets, and perhaps you've never had one before, how would you even begin to begin the process if you don't have the right people on staff that would know and understand how to even put something like that together? The financial literacy is at all levels of your organization, certainly at the board level, having a treasurer and other people that are on the board that understand finances, but then down to staff, and financial literacy is important, certainly today, if not back then. This is very, very interesting to me. So enterprise risk management, and when I remembered when I presented Madison Nonprofit Day, show of hands who had ever heard of enterprise risk management in a room of 30 or 40 people. I think I had one hand. I'm not sure the results of that would be a whole lot different today, but I think we're going to find that this, going forward as a long-term strategy, will become more important. Corporate America does this all the time. Large corporations have whole departments and teams of people that do risk management. They assess the risk of something occurring negatively in the organization and develop strategies to either respond to the risk, minimize, eliminate, do whatever is necessary based upon the categories of risks, considering consequences and likelihood of that. PR failure at Starbucks comes to mind, something like that. Remember how quickly they were able to respond to challenges there. Obviously, as a nonprofit community, we do not have the resources to have risk management departments and so forth, but we do have to understand what risks are and what we can do to mitigate them. And that's part of a strategy that a strong nonprofit organization would want to have. Internal controls, we had some questions on this from the Q&A, and I've had some emails from folks, and maybe we can have a little bit more of a discussion on this later. But what do we do in this environment? And certainly it is a challenge when we're working remotely. We as auditors are talking to you about the importance of internal controls, what you need to do to protect the organization. Simply said, think about this. There's two different types of controls. There are prevention controls and detection controls. Prevention controls prevent something from occurring. This is in your office. When you are in your office and you have 2 or 3 different people doing things, you are segregating duties, essentially. A detection control is something that we do after the fact. We're looking for something that has already occurred. This might be reviewing a bank reconciliation, looking at canceled checks, looking at other reconciliations. The short answer to some of the questions I've had very recently to this is we really have to look at detection controls and rely less on prevention controls. Clearly, in this environment, we can't have the logistics of having people do different things. And so looking at those detection controls and subsequent reviews and so forth become very important. I apologize, I have 2 monitors, so I have to look back and forth. I feel fortunate. I know some people are trying to survive in this environment in a small laptop monitor, but I have another one here. Right tools. So this basically talks about the fact that you really have to have the right accounting systems. If you weren't able to produce the information that was necessary to apply for a PPP loan, a payroll protection payment loan program was the program, then you wouldn't have been able to perhaps respond to that opportunity. And then does this accounting system provide you all that information? For instance, if you're not on the accrual basis, if you're on the cash basis, it would be more difficult right now for you to determine some cash flow budgets and operating budgets that you might have. And 2 tools, certainly in this remote working environment, if you weren't able to adjust quickly to remote working, meaning you didn't have virtual VPN networks and some of the hardware and software necessary to have people work remotely, certainly this current situation has been a challenge for you. So we have a self-evaluation test that I used back then. I think we're going to do this right now because I'm sort of interested in this. I don't have a benchmark for people last 4 years ago when they might have took this, but I think what you might get out of this is understanding maybe where you are with your other peers that are on this call today. So Emily, if I could just ask you, there's a PDF. This PDF will be available to you as part of the slides at the end, so you can take this back and maybe digest this a little bit more in your organization. But let's go ahead and put that PDF up, Emily, if you wouldn't mind. What I'm going to ask, and is that full screen, Emily? Is it easy for people to
let's
do?
see.
Let's try to get that full screen if you can. So basically I have 8 questions here based around the 8 concepts I just talked about, and you're going to score this 1 to 5, 1 being not much at all, and 5 being strong. And 8 concepts I just talked about here we're going to rate, and we're going to kind of see how we are. Very interesting. First question, how would you rate your vulnerability to financial storms? Well, we might not have been able to choose this. We might not have been thinking about this particular one back then, but certainly it's relevant now. And I would answer this question sort of how you feel today. So this financial storm right now creates vulnerability for all of us, but maybe some more than others. One is, we'll never know. Back then, we never know what the future will bring. I think that's probably pretty relevant today versus 5 being, we really have no uncertainties at all. So you'll just have to maybe write this on a piece of paper or something. You're going to add up the numbers here in just a minute. Number 2, is your liquidity sufficient to meet your current obligations? I'm not sure how we're going to make payroll next week, and I know we have people out there that are in that situation. versus 5 being we have lots of cash in the bank. Go ahead and write a number down there for your organizations. Are your reserves sufficient? We'll see in a later survey poll the interesting thing about reserves. But one, I know many organizations have no reserves at all, which is a serious situation. Being 5 being we have so many reserves that my board has policies on what we do with them. Go ahead and write a number down for that. Number 4, do you have plans for growth? And they're incorporated in our financial plans. Not sure how you might rate that today, but think about this as just a planning. I mean, are you in the midst of planning right now? Do you understand the importance of incorporating finances into your financial plan? 5, does your team have sufficient financial literacy? One being, what's the difference between a debit and credit? And I know we have a few people out there right now that might say that. To 5 being, we have CPAs on staff, CPA equivalents. Question number 6, do you regularly assess risk and develop plans to minimize them? We have no risks, which is a false statement, obviously, because there's always risks. Versus 5 being, we have a risk manager on staff and a written ERM plan. Emily, you just scroll down here to the next 2. Internal controls. 1, we have no internal controls and multiple findings in our audits. To 5 being, we have multiple staff involved in segregation duties, internal control program with monitoring. And finally, number 8, are your accounting and other systems sufficient to give management the information it needs to make decisions? I don't think there's probably ever been a time when timely financial information is more important than this current environment. We have an Excel spreadsheet to process data. Yes, there are some out there that have that, versus we have a fully integrated data management system that reports on all levels of management. So if you want to score that out and go ahead and tally your results, because I'm going to ask you in just a minute what your score was. Just give that another minute. Let's look at the, I think we can, Emily, close this out and let's go to the next poll question. Okay, so here you go. Basically the scoring, unscientific scoring system that I came up with 4 years ago. And I kind of thought about different things. I actually used this in a number of situations with clients to help them really assess their financial strength. And we'll give this just another minute, Emily, and we'll kind of see what the results are. And here we go. We have, you know, I'm just feeling pretty good about this, actually. If I kind of think about the numbers here again, the top 2 represent almost 79% of the people calling right now. I would consider to be financially strong. And the bottom 22% certainly have some challenges. So for you folks in the lower section, hopefully there were some things in the 8 concepts here that would help move you. You can see probably where your lower numbers are, what you can move to move you from the lower quartile up into the upper. But I'm encouraged despite where we are today. If you want to go back to my slides, Emily, you can go ahead and turn off the PDF, and we'll just move into right now. So what is more important now? I think I've kind of talked a little bit about what you needed to do to get up to this situation, and what can we do today to go from I said financial sustainability, which is really what I was talking about here in the first half, to what I'm going to now move into what I've deemed financial survivability.
And Scott, I'll have you share your screen with the presentation on it. So do you just want
Oh, okay. Yeah. So let's see. This, of course, will be my challenge here. So I have to get back to share screen.
Yep.
Share, you cannot share a screen with other participants. I think you have to turn yours off, do you?
Yeah, I'll try that.
Do you see my slides?
Not yet.
Not yet. Okay, let me go back here, share screen. And there we go. I think I got it. How about that? Does that look good?
Yep, if you just want to close out of your presenter view so we just see one slide.
Oh, okay.
Thanks for bearing with us.
Yeah, and so that just means they're going to just see the next slides. So let's see. It's not stop share. Display settings, got it. How's that look? Oh, good. Thanks.
Ready to rock and roll.
You know, we're all learning so much. I know I'm becoming a Zoom expert. I even have, like, I didn't do it today, but I even have backgrounds on my Zoom now, which are kind of fun. Okay, so let's see. So what's important now? So we're talking about sustainability. We have another half hour. We're going to talk about survivability. And I've put together 12 concepts that are mine. I've just kind of thought about our clients and what we might do in this situation. And I hope you find value in these 12 things. And, you know, quite frankly, many of this are a carryover from survivability, and it is in our new environment of survivability. All right, first four. I'm just going to assume that this is going on, but if it's not, you know, that obviously has to be a cause of concern. I know I have had some conversations with people recently that where the board has kind of been a no-show in some of this. And I know that might be surprising, but maybe you find out the strength of your board in times like this. This is, you know, there's a lot been written and said about, you know, board staff responsibilities and division of work and that sort of thing. This is probably, for the management consultants out there, I might disagree, but this is a time that it's all hands on deck. We're working on this together. I'm in on a couple of boards, and we're not having monthly meetings. We're having weekly meetings to talk about what's going on. And in many cases, board members are getting involved in doing things because we're not in the situation where there are very critical decisions to be made. They have to be made timely. So maybe just assess kind of where you are at right now with your board. How often are you meeting? How engaged are they? And the decision making is obviously one in a survival mode, one that everyone is involved in. Budgets, and you know, you'll see a lot of what I'm talking about today is really financial, but if we think about survivability, it probably is the one thing that is most important at this point are your finances. So scenario budgets. So I know you all prepare budgets once a year. They're probably more like zero-based budgeting, where you just basically, or just historical budgets where you take the previous year and you kind of make some adjustments and so forth. This is a time where you really want to involve scenario budgets. And basically the concept there is that you consider a number of variables, and then you prepare, one board I'm on, we prepare a sort of a high, medium, and low. Sort of think about it maybe kind of like a what if budget. So what happens if this happens? What happens if that happens? And the budgets too need to be probably short-term, at least short-term, the scenario budgets. You might even consider some long-term decisions as well, because in the next suggestion here is talking about reserves. So if you, and I've been in some meetings and conversations, are considering committing a part of your reserves to fund current operations, then that has to be based on both on a short-term analysis and a long-term analysis. And somebody, said to me, well, Scott, I guess this would be easier to commit reserves and that sort of thing if I knew how long this was going to last. And my response is, financial planning, personal financial planning would be really easy if I knew what day I was going to die. It'd be sort of kind of helpful, and then you could just plan out that way. Well, we don't know. And so one of the things that you'll have to very carefully, and this is why you want your board involved, very carefully consider is not to overcommit too soon reserves. We're in, just thinking of foundation board we're on, we gave out extra money recently. Well, it'll happen, be approved this week, additional funds. And because the needs are so great. And, you think about the most immediate needs, and maybe it's not needed later. Maybe this is not going to happen, but what if this is sustained for a long period of time? And those thoughts are scary, but we have to kind of think about, well, what if we're here having this conversation a year from now, and we've already committed, large sums of our reserves. So I say here, first of all, evaluate the sufficiency, and then also a commitment to how much to invest. Now, I'm not suggesting you have to commit any of them. I mean, maybe you're going to be fine, but in some cases, the needs for your programming are so great, the thought about holding on to something in the future when you could make an immediate impact in the current is an important discussion. And that's clearly, that is board level thinking. Be realistic about fundraising goals. I probably sat in 4 fundraising webinars now. Wisconsin Philanthropy Network. Melody Wagner had a seminar on that just last week. Melanie Tapano brought in some fundraising experts that were, so there's lots being out there. And maybe I've gotten a little bit smarter. I'm an accountant, but I've learned a few things. What I've learned from all of this is that now is not the time not to be talking to your donors. And that, there was some discussion about, well, we don't want to bother them at this time. Well, this is exactly the time where you want to be picking up the phone and calling, connecting with them. Maybe not even necessarily to ask for money, but having that personal connection. When I say be realistic, because I was in a couple of conversations that were talking about sponsorships and corporate giving, and I can just tell you that I really think that's a significant challenge right now. You've heard me say that corporations, they are definitely in survival mode, and their survival mode is to protect as much cash as you possibly can, because you just don't know what the next need is going to be. And then there's others that will find, if I just think back to my experiences in 2008, how we, organizations that had a small number of large donors, and depending upon the mission, their contributions were down as much as 20, 30 or more percent, 40%. Some small organizations that had a large number of small donors, actually their donations went up, depending upon the need and the mission of the organization. So being realistic about that in this period. Some other thoughts here. I've mentioned a few things. Cash flow budgets. I can tell you that most of all of our clients have operating budgets. They really don't do cash flow budgets. If you budget on the cash basis, it probably is a cash flow budget, but if you budget on the accrual basis, that doesn't in any way begin to help you understand when you will be short of cash and when those needs will hit. Reduce as many variable operating expenses as possible. Reduce workforce when necessary. These are hard decisions, but this is what's going on. Looking at every line item and asking yourself if survivability is, if you're in that kind of lower part of the poll, and if you're the 8% that doesn't know how you might survive, this is where you're doing some work. Looking to collaborate with other partners to share expenses and resources. Been on some calls again with people that are nonprofits. This community is amazing. People are talking about how to collaborate and how to share. I really see some significant benefits coming out of this in the future, where things that are done today make sense for the future and will continue. And we're going to see how we do business change. Utilizing all the federal and state stimulus programs. So, I got questions like 2 weeks ago. Well, should we apply? Maybe we don't really qualify. Is it fair? I was on a national call with other CPAs around the country talking about their clients, and one client was debating whether or not to apply for this when they have substantial reserves, thinking that there was sort of a moral or ethical concern about that. But you can, if it turns out you don't need it, it's a loan. You can pay it back, if it is forgiven, that's great. I mean, and it allowed you to keep your staff fully employed. Melody, by reference here today, is one of 4 experts at Wagner who have immersed themselves as much data as possible in understanding what these programs are. And some days we have more questions than answers, but we attempt to find answers, and every day there's probably something new that comes out that's more information that might have changed your thinking of what was before. Melody is available, or contact information is on our website. Please, and she's our representative for our nonprofit clients. Use her as a resource. Finally, 4 kind of last thoughts here. This is sort of a hard thing, and I think we might be interested in the last poll results on this particular one. But eliminating programs, I think there are so many things that we sort of hold on that are dear to us, maybe dear to our mission, maybe a little bit of mission creep. Sometimes the things that are the most important aren't the things that make the most money for us either, and are subsidized by other funds or donations or reserves. But I think that if you are in survival mode, if you're not in the top quartile of the last survey, I think you have to look seriously at each one of your programs and consider whether or not, one, of course, is it essential to your mission? 2, what is the bottom line on that? And back to the first part of sustainability, just even having the right financial literacy to understand the sort of bottom line in program areas, what they produce, and what the cost, what the true cost of running that program really is. In a survivability mode, this is probably one area that you should spend some time. Get help. There's professionals out there. Melanie, I don't know if I didn't see the list of attendees. Melanie Schmidt from Timpano, you're on the call. She and I have been having some discussions, Melissa Scholes, other professionals, because this is really a time when Tracy Schreck, who's been doing some of our other webinars. I spent some time with her on engaging staff. The professionals, I know I said look at every variable line item and wonder which ones you can cut. This is probably the one that that you might want to invest some resources in, because going this alone may not be the best survival strategy. See the opportunity in disruptive innovation, and we've talked a little bit about this. Melody, thank you for your thought leadership on this. You and I've had some conversations about this, but the basic concept is, in this disruption, there's a huge opportunity for innovation, and we've already seen some of it. The working remotely. Who would have ever thought in the old environment that we could actually get things done remotely? And at least as it relates to what we're doing right now with our audits and so forth, we have lots of success stories of clients who are finding new ways of doing work. And in some respects, some of this will become more efficient. There has been a clamor, I guess, on our accounting side for people to look at cloud-based technologies as a way of doing business, at least on the accounting side. But then also on the programmatic side as well, how you deliver service. A restaurant has gone from in-room dining to carry-out dining. We'll see how that kind of shakes out long term, but we may have had some fundamental shifts there. I am on the board. I don't know if Lisa Dugdale's on the call here, but just thinking about my own recent board meeting last Thursday, as we were talking about the Center for Community Stewardship, what our mission and our goals are, that we've been talking about doing collective fundraising for our projects. Conversation that we had never ever had in the past. We've talked about doing disaster relief fund fiscal sponsorship. We're basically a fiscal sponsorship program, for those of you who aren't aware of us, and but hadn't really got very far. Those conversations are starting to get deeper, and we, even as an organization, may evolve in this sort of current environment. I didn't get a chance to put on the slides, but there is an organization that Melody made me aware of called Inspiring Service. It's an organization that formed out in Cincinnati, interestingly 3 years ago. And you can go out there, Inspiring Service, you'll have to write that down, .org. They have 4 programs: a Board Connect community giving platform, a community volunteer guide, and a Skills Connect. And all of these things, and then they're producing stories of nonprofits that have had success with innovation in how they're delivering service and how they're accomplishing their mission. Go out there. There's some guides and so forth that were really interesting. They said that, I'm just going to read this, I didn't memorize it. Our mission is to provide innovative solutions to inspire and empower people and organizations to strengthen and improve their community and themselves. And I was really impressed with that. We'll see some stuff come out as a result of this pandemic, but here was a group of people who had the foresight 3 years ago to start talking about these things. I think that's all I'll say on that. There's maybe, and you know what, and it'd be interesting if anybody out there, I thought this might be helpful to the rest of the group, in the chat feature, not in the questions and answers, if you want to just tell a quick story of something that you think was innovative in terms of that has come out of this, that has changed maybe how you do business now, but will change how you do business in the future. That might be really helpful for the rest of the group. And then just remember, I made comparisons to the corporate world, and their survival tactics involve return on equity, return on investment to stockholders. They're all about existing and continuing to exist. We as a community, we're so much bigger than that. So we exist for good, and it's not about profit or gain. And so using reserves to continue the good in the programs and so forth is so important. All right, so those are my, I guess I'll call them top 12 tips for survivability. And then, so just, challenge yourself right now. What are you learning now that will lead you to a more stronger, sustainable organization? And I think some organizations, I hope we're wrong on the 8% not surviving, or hopefully not more than that, and that we will come out of this as a stronger community, both financially and in our reputation of what we did during this pandemic versus other sectors of our economy. Emily, I have the final poll right here, and if you want to pull that up, the question is, what do you think will save your organization? Pick any that apply, so you can pick more than one. I have the results. This is the same poll that we had 2 weeks ago. I have the results of that poll. And as you start doing that, we'll maybe make some comparisons. I don't think that this has probably changed like the other one in 2 weeks, but there's a few things that answers here that might support some of the things I was just talking about. I'll give you another 10 seconds or so. Think about each one of those and what are the most important things to you. All right, so Emily here, reserves 69%. My next slide gives the percentages from last one, but I don't want to move over until we get that. So 2 weeks ago, we were at 64%. So the population is different. The sample size is probably the same. Continued revenues, 70%. That's really encouraging that we can see that actually 64% of you have reserves that you can do this, that nearly more than 70% of you continue to see your revenue streams coming. The two lowest ones here, interestingly, are cost cutting and reducing or eliminating programs. And cost cutting has gone down a little bit from 2 weeks ago. Reducing and eliminating programs has gone up. So I think from 21% here to 17. So perhaps as this goes on, that may become a more and more important strategy for each of you. Strong leadership, I was at 63% 2 weeks ago, 75. I really feel like people are stepping up, and that is both the board and management. Here's another good one. Federal and state stimulus program. More than 50% of you are using that now. That's up from 49% last 2 weeks ago. Hopefully this next round, Melody, you might want to make a comment on that. I don't know when the application process is, how long that's going to last, but how much money.
You can just jump in there if you want real quick.
Sure, yeah.
Everything that I've read and heard over the weekend is I obviously finalized over the weekend and opened back up at 10:30 this morning. Banks, for the most part, are prioritizing who was already still in the pipeline because so many of the first requests didn't get handled. But you are encouraged to reach out to your bankers personally if you aren't in a pipeline, or if you are, to see what your status is. And you can apply to more than one bank. You can only accept one loan, but you can apply to more than one bank if you're not getting responsiveness enough from your own bank.
Good, good. Yeah, I have an example of a client on Friday. The banker wasn't getting back to them. I gave them the name of another banker who was very interested in helping people. Here's innovation. They said, well, we'll process your loan if you move your accounts over here. So if somebody is not having response, this person is working Saturdays and Sundays, so there's some innovation. Email me and I can give you the name of that bank. So we're up from 49% to 56, and here's a really great change. 47% 2 weeks ago was saying innovation. We have now 63%, and I think we'll continue to see that being a successful strategy. Here are those results of those things. You could take the poll down, Emily, and we can see those are the percentages I just gave to you. I was going to leave 10 minutes. Well, I left 7 minutes, but that's okay. And Melody, and anything, Melody, you might want to just add as information you think would be helpful for people.
We've had a few discussions in the chat, which have been great. Please continue to add your questions or examples as you would like here in our remaining time together. The only thing I wanted to reiterate was Scott's points about how this is changing some of what we do on a daily basis. And I'm really encouraged to see the ways that there's collaboration happening as well as innovation. And in your last poll, again, that innovation piece, because it really does provide an opportunity to, while we want to survive, also to look at what's going well and what's going to change and how do we adapt to the new normal.
Good. So we have any questions at all, Melody, or? And we can certainly answer technical questions on PPP loans and CARES Act.
Yeah, we've had a number of people indicate that they did get their PPP funding, which is awesome. Obviously, now the important part is applying and getting the forgiveness piece. Hang in there. As soon as we have anything more definitive, we will come back in our blogs and or hosting another webinar with more specifics, because there's a number of things in the forgiveness piece that are not well defined, and consultants and experts in the area are on two different sides as to how it's being interpreted. So hang in there and be patient. We'll continue to provide whatever information we get or what we know definitively.
Yeah, so one potentially scary development is a belief among some that the forgiveness piece of this would be deemed a federal award under uniform guidance. And the AICPA Government Audit Equality Center has sent a letter. I saw that last week, I think, Wednesday or Thursday, to the Office of Management Budget for clarification on that. Let's just hope that that doesn't happen. And I don't want to talk about what would happen if that's the case. There still is the concern that some forgiveness piece will be considered double dipping if you use some of those salaries for other state and local county salary costs. I could venture a guess, but it'd just be a guess. And I think we'll just sort of wait to see what happens there. Remember, if you capture some of the money to cover costs, and some is forgiven and some isn't, or would be deemed a double dipping, it's still a loan, and you can pay the loan back next month with a 1% interest rate. So I never really felt that was a reason not to apply. Applying, you can deal with the consequences later.
A couple of things I jump in here and add. One, we had a question on EIDL. That program also received additional funding, but when I checked this morning, the applications had not yet been reopened. And I have not seen much information on what they're going to do with the pipeline that existed at the point that the EIDL ran out of money. So again, as soon as we have better information, we will be glad to pass that along. But they did get additional funding, so hopefully we will hear something soon on that. And then I was going to go back to what you shared earlier, Scott, about do I qualify if I have reserves? Everyone that I've listened to and what I've read and seen indicates that the certifications you have to sign for these funds indicate you have to have a need, but they talk about the uncertainty. And I was dealing with one organization last week who has some significant reserves, but they also within the next 6 months could have some significant losses for events that were canceled that would eat up those reserves. So to me, that says they're uncertain. They qualify because they're going to have to start furloughing employees to maintain a basic cash level and plan for those anticipated losses. So just take all that into consideration when you're assessing your eligibility.
Okay, we have just 2 minutes left here. So here's just some resources, the Wagner CPA's COVID Resource Center. This, along with all our previous webinars, some of them become a little dated on the technical side, is there. If you're not getting a newsletter, you found us some other way, Emily would be happy to sign you up for that. The Nonprofit Risk Management Center, that just has some great stuff on this enterprise risk management. Wallace Foundation, I don't have the link there, strongnonprofits.org, whole bunch of tools there, all free, downloaded. Wallace Foundation paid for that. There's an operating reserve policy toolkit, down the road, and I'm happy to talk to you about that. And then Inspiring Service, I really felt like they had some great examples and some tools that might be helpful to you as you innovate your programs and agencies.
Awesome. Well, thank you for all of those resources, Scott, and all the awesome information that you shared today. Do you have anything else to add for last comments?
I don't.
Sounds good. Melody?
No, just know you can reach out to us. And if you have suggestions for things you'd like us to address in this forum, hey, we're open to it. We'd love to hear it because we're here to help you through this process and we want to meet your needs.
Absolutely. Yes. Thank you. And thank you all for joining us. We so appreciate all your time. Please, like Scott said, go out into our website, reach out to us if you have any questions. Check out what webinars we have coming up. We are trying to stay on top of this thing as best we can and give you the best information possible, the most up to date. So we hope to see you again soon, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. Thanks, Scott. Thanks, Melody.
Thank you.